Okay, guys, so I'm going to start us with the walkthrough of Cody's Cafe. So you guys should have all already gotten the link to Cody's Cafe. People are at different parts in doing it. So the first step, I'm just going to kind of go through this fast because I feel like we know this, is you're going to fork it to your account from the full stack Cody's Cafe. You're going to clone and download it. So I have already actually downloaded it to my machine. And this is just the file. I've done nothing else besides just adding it and opening it up. So the first thing you're going to do, I'm going to kind of go through this fast, is you're going to read the README. You should always look at the README because there are some hints that could cause like late issues down the road later. So I'm going to npm install. npm test is how we test, but I believe at this moment they're all pending. Yep, I haven't gotten rid of any of the X's from the test specs, but this should give me a good idea of where I want to start. I probably want to start with the coffee model. And then this one can actually be something that could lead to a lot of bugs later if you don't do it. Is in your in your terminal, you're going to want to make sure you create DB, and you want to make sure that you name it correctly. If you don't name it exactly how it's spelled here, it's not going to be able to link properly, and your code's not going to be able to find and see the correct database. So create DB, no spaces, Cody's Cafe. A way to check to see if this has happened is I'm going to pull up my post to go, refresh. There's Cody's Cafe. It's created, named as it's supposed to according to the README. So then the first technique I would do is just start looking through these test specs. The first one looks like the coffee model. So I'm going to pull up in the test folder. I'm going to pull up the coffee model tests right here. I'm going to pull up the file I'm supposed to be working in, which would be the coffee model. Get rid of everything else for right now. I'm going to pull up that model and then kind of start working through the test. Everything else in this file is already set up. So I'm going to attack the coffee model test specs first. Get rid of the X's. Runs again. We'll start with these first two test specs we're supposed to pass. So here we can see that make this bigger. See. Okay. So the first test spec here is going to be column definitions and validations. It has a name and it has a ingredients column. So what we learned from our Sequelize documentation is we are going to start by defining that. So it's already all set up here. Coffee, required Sequelize, that's already all in our file. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is just set up the name. So name, this is according to our Sequelize syntax. Let's see. Name, okay, we just need to have them. We're going to probably need a type. We've already required Sequelize. It looks to me in these test specs like it's a string. So we're going to do Sequelize string. and we can look up the specific different types of types in our sequelized documentation that was sent out, and you guys would be allowed to use this on your pillars as well. And you can see the way I was able to get it was a string was just from this, the test specs. You can see it's creating a string, and then there's also going to be a ingredients. This word is kind of hard to spell, so you want to make sure that it's spelled right, or these test specs are going to fail. That's another common error. Same as before, we're going to set up a type. It looks like it's an array based on these test specs here. And then the sequelize array takes in another thing. It's an array of strings. So, string. Okay. Let's save that and see if we are passing. Okay, it looks to me like we now have got our first one set up. It has a name and ingredients. Name is required. So if we go to, I'm actually going to pull up our sequelized documents just because I'm going to keep talking about these. So these are the sequelized documentations here. Model definition. This is where you can find data types. Sorry. This is where you can find all of the different ones. You're allowed to use this on pillars. We want a string. We wanted an array of strings. That's how I knew that. There's a value called allow null, which you can also find in this sequelized text. There's all these different data validations that you're going to use. And we want name to be required. So another way to say name is required is you're not going to be able to have a null value. So it would be allow in the, sorry, this is in the name. It's going to be allow null here is false. That is now required, and the model will not allow a null value for that. Okay, so we're passing 2 of our test specs now, making good progress. Okay, so an instance method. The instant method is going to be on this coffee model. We know that instant methods are on the prototype. And then it's called get ingredients. I think I'm not telling this right. Okay, so I'm going to go and I'm going to start looking specifically at these test specs. Save. So I didn't add anything, so that one's failing yet. It returns a list of ingredients as a comma delimited string. Okay, so it's going to be it's an instant method, so it's going to be a function. Let's look at our test specs just to see what they're actually testing here. So it's going to create a new coffee. It's going to create another coffee. The test specs are doing this all in its own environment. And then it's going to expect when I run get ingredients on this coffee here, it's going to return a string that is comma delimited with all of the ingredients that were in this array. So there are probably multiple different ways you could do this. The easiest way is we know this is a function. It's going to take in an ingredient. Sorry, it's not going to take in anything. It's going to be a function. You're just going to call get ingredients. And what are we going to want to return? We're going to want to take the ingredients that are in the array. And then we're going to want to use an array method. I don't know if anybody has any ideas of an array method that they would use to take all of these ingredients and combine it. I'm not sure if anybody's...
Join.
Okay, yeah, that's actually the exact one I was looking for. So there's... What I would do is I would look up the array method just to make sure that we're using the syntax right on one of these allowed websites like MDN. So here I just Googled what the join method is just to make sure I'm using it. So it looks like it's called on an array. If you don't put in anything, there's nothing between it. If you put in a string with nothing, there's still nothing between it. If you put in this, there's a dash between it. So we want to make sure that there's, based on the test specs, it's expecting there to be a comma and a space between it. So we're going to do .join, comma, space. So that basically takes everything in the array and it returns it based on that. Okay, let's see if that passes. I might have a bug. Okay. I'm kind of worried about spelling ingredients wrong. So if you're running into bugs, make sure that your words are spelled the same, because even with capitalization or spelling, that will create an error for you. Okay, so there's another method, and I would highly recommend when you're doing all of this to do it in the order that the test specs are given, because as you can see, like in these test specs here, they call methods on stuff you've already set up. So like coffee.create, it is creating the model, and if you don't have the model set up, it's going to kind of create an issue. So the next one is a class method. I don't know if you guys remember the difference between class methods and instant methods, but the class methods are for the whole class. They're not called on the prototype. So I'm going to start by looking at the test specs for this. Oh, they even tell you can use the docs in here. So class method, find by ingredients. By ingredient, get rid of these so I can see where exactly I'm looking at. So I'm just going to look at the test specs before I even write anything. Okay, sorry, I was just trying to figure out the chat there. So I'm just going to look at the test specs before I even write anything, because I just want to kind of have an idea of what I'm doing. So I'm creating all of these different coffees right now with different ingredients. And then here's just an example. When I then call coffee find by ingredient espresso, coffee find by ingredient whipped cream, they're expecting it to return a length of 2. So when I call drinks with espresso, they're expecting that if these are the 3 inputs, it's going to return 2 of these, and that is because only 2 of them actually have espresso in it. So just wrapping my head around what this test spec is asking me to do. So it's going to first check to make sure my array, I'm returning the right amount of, it's going to check to make sure I'm returning the right things. And then it's also going to check, let's see, to equal true. And then it's also going to check to make sure that the names that are being returned of the coffees that contain espresso to be mocha and can't even pronounce that, Gallo. So that's just to start out what I would do before I even start this class method again, not on the prototype, just on the class. Is that spelled right? Yes, I think so. So we can see in the test specs, find by ingredient, it takes in a string, which is an ingredient. Without the S, that is a good catch. Thank you. So that would have definitely failed. So it takes in an ingredient, which is going to be a string. You can see in the test specs that's what it's doing, and it returns an array of, it returns the coffees that have the, it returns the coffees that have this ingredient as one of its ingredients in that array. Is there any method you guys can think of that is used to maybe find all where there's a certain value? Let's see in the chat. Yep, find all. Okay, we want find all, and actually contains is going to be used too. Okay, so we're going to say take this. We're looking at the model, and we're going to say find all. Yep. And then we have to make sure that this is blocking my screen. Okay, there we go. We're going to find all, and then we're going to do where. We're going to look at the ingredients. I'm not sure. I think you guys had to use this a little bit earlier, but there's these methods. I'm going to pull up the Sequelize docs I had. I think it was called they're called like validations. Yeah, so we're going to have to perform a validation on this. So I found the document on the side if that's where I'm looking. So I'm having trouble finding the chat, but you're going to look at validations, and we want to figure out where we're going to make sure the array has that ingredient that we passed in. So I'm going to look at these validation methods and kind of see, is there one that maybe would help me out? Okay. So specifically, I'm looking to see if it contains, if it contains a value. So there's all these different methods I can use to validate, but in this case, I'm going to use the contains method. Okay, so I'm gonna find all ingredients. This is the syntax for Sequelize for all of these methods, and we're going to use the doc contains. We just found that on our the Sequelize documentation. And if we have questions about how the syntax of these validations work, we can look at all of these examples in our Sequelize documentation about how to use validations. It's kind of all in this documentation. So we're going to check to see if it contains, and it's an array, the ingredient that we passed in. Yep, these are connected. I think all my brackets match up. Hope they do. And we have passed this test. So that being said, just to go back, you have this Sequelize documentation. It's a ton of stuff. There's a lot of stuff in here. I would get familiar with how you find and contains probably wasn't the only option. There's probably different ways that you can figure out what is the best. There's like, is it a credit card? Is it a date? There's all these different validations you can add to your database, but these tests are specifically asking you to just validate these in a certain way. And then before I pass it off to Mika, I'm going to start just on the hooks. Hooks are kind of tricky. So adds love to ingredients if not included. That sounds kind of weird. So what does it mean adding love? Let's go to the test specs and see what it means by saying adding love. Okay. Expect ingredients in index of love to equal true. What does that mean? Let's look at these closer. So index of love to equal true. Okay, so then we're going to go to our hooks. I'm looking at our hooks. Going to try and decide which hook to use. It says adds love to ingredients if not included. Which one would I want to do? So we want to check to see if love is already included. I would pick before save, because we want to check to see if it's included, and if not, we want to save it and add it. So I'm going to do, this looks like it is going to be on the class again. I just updated it, so now my hook is failing. So I'm going to say coffee before save. So let's see what it's expecting. This is phrased kind of weird. So it's saying coffee dot ingredients index of 1 is greater than -1. So it means that its index is positive, which means it exists. So it sounds to me like they want us to add in an index, an ingredient called love. Like they just want an ingredient in the string called love. So they're saying if love isn't an ingredient in this coffee, that if the index of love, it doesn't exist, it's greater than 1, we're going to want to add it. So it's basically saying, is there an ingredient called love? And if love is not an ingredient already in this coffee, we're going to add love. So it's going to take in ingredients. I spelled ingredients wrong again. So we need to check to see if ingredients is here in our model, and we're going to first to check to make sure if ingredients is an array. We need to verify that first. There's an array method. Oops, this is wrong syntax here. This is a function. If array is array ingredients, we're going to check first to make sure this is an array, because otherwise it's going to create an error message if ingredients isn't actually an array. But we're also going to have to check to see if ingredients already has the ingredient love. Does anybody know an array method that we could use? I'm missing yep, I think my parentheses are off here. I have it here instead of here. Good catch. Does that look right? You just need to validate this stuff. I think there's, let's see. Ingredients. It's just kind of good practice to make sure that things are passed in. I think in this case, I don't really see a scenario where this actually wouldn't be an array, but if we're just talking about best practices, you'd want to. But that being said, is there any array method anybody can think of that you would use to see if an array includes a certain value? Yep, okay, it includes. That was a big hint. So you're going to say, we're going to check, we only need to modify it if it doesn't include love. So we're going to say ingredients, the explanation before means doesn't, and then we're going to dot includes. So we're going to have to check to see if it doesn't include love. And now that we have our if statement set up, what are we going to do if it doesn't include love? Well, we can just push it into that array. And we're just going to add love to our ingredient list. And if you look at that, it looks like it's passing. That being said, I'm going to pass it off to Mika to do, but that this is kind of just a good example. It's some of these test specs, you have to really read them and make sure you understand what they're saying, because they're saying add loves to the gradient. You're probably thinking, what is like adding love? And then you go through the test specs and it's saying literally just add the string love if love already isn't an ingredient. So that being said, I am going to pass this off to Mika.